So we're going to get started, so please take your seats. So good morning, everyone. I'm Jean-Michel Molina from the University of Paris and ENRS in France, and I would like to welcome you to this session this morning on the politics of PrEP. I'm going to introduce the session, but before I start, I would like to thank Chris Malouros from UNAIDS and Lauren Manguiro from IAS, who have put together this session this morning, and who have invited a panel of great speakers all over the world. What I'm going to do today is also to share with you the French experience with PrEP. These are my disclosures. So we know PrEP works in clinical trials and even better in real world when it is taken. Oh, okay. I can see them here. So maybe someone could help us to show the slides? Okay. So maybe one slide back so you could meet Chris Malouros and Lauren Manguiro, who again organized the session this morning. Thanks to them. Okay, so you know that PrEP works in clinical trials. As I said, even better in real world when people know that it is a very effective tool to prevent HIV acquisition. Again, we know it's critical that people take it as recommended, whether it's a daily or on demand for MSM. Unfortunately, so far, the level of implementation has been too low, too limited, and many countries are still reluctant to implement or upscale PrEP. So during the session this morning, we are going to share experiences across countries to help breaking the barriers to PrEP acceptability and implementation at a time where there is insufficient coverage of treatment for those with HIV infection, and at a time also where budgets are shrinking for the fight against HIV/AIDS. We know that community and civil society empowerment is key to make people aware about HIV prevention in general and PrEP in particular. So let me now tell you about the French experience with PrEP. The first step is to know your epidemic. It's critical to be able to adapt your response. And these are data from Public Health France showing every year since 2003 the number of new HIV infection diagnosed in France. And you can see that over the last 13 years, there has been no change in the number of new infections, 6,000 new infections every year in France. And when you look at the blue line on the top, you could see that the majority of these new diagnoses are made among MSM. And actually, it's increasing among MSM over the last 10 years. And nowadays, 43% of new infections are diagnosed among MSM. So there is a critical need here. As you may know, PrEP has been approved in France 2 years ago now, but the path towards PrEP approval has not been so easy. And it started in 2009 when we had at ENRS discussion with the community, TRT5 and AIDS, and we got a first grant on on-demand PrEP for MSM. Then the community did a great job. They actually traveled throughout France and conducted a nationwide community consultation and empowerment campaign so that everyone in the MSM community would know about PrEP, would know about the study that we are about to implement. We started the study in 2012, the IPERGATE trial, and when we get the results, early 2015, at the same time, PROUD actually released its results. The community was prepared to receive these results and to actually use and roll over PrEP. Then we had to wait for ECDC to issue actually recommendations at the European level. WHO also updated its guideline at the end of 2015. We got the support from EACS, the AIDS European Clinical Society to recommend also PrEP for MSM and transgender individuals. We had to wait also for a French group of experts to recommend PrEP. With all these recommendations, we were, we felt we should start and open a first PrEP clinic in Paris, even though we didn't have yet the green line from the Ministry of Health. And, with all these steps, at the beginning of January 2016, our Ministry of Health eventually got approval for Truvada for PrEP, and also decided that it would be fully reimbursed. So where are we today with PrEP implementation in France? So it's approved, fully reimbursed, at least the cost of drugs, not fully reimbursed for the cost of visits and tests that you need to do when you are on PrEP. It is approved for adults at high risk of sexual acquisition of HIV. So it is mainly MSM transgenders, but also high-risk heterosexual people from high endemic areas. The prescription can be obtained in hospitals with HIV specialists, in STI clinics. And what's important is that this prescription can be renewed by GPs, so that people don't have to go back to hospitals if they want to renew their prescription. TDF-FTC can be delivered in hospital pharmacies, but also in private pharmacies. And now we have, since July 2017, a number of generic TDF-FTCs available that obviously lower the cost of PrEP. The Ministry of Health also launched a national campaign for prevention of HIV among MSM at the end of 2016. But, this is kind of a sophisticated campaign because you have to actually log to the website sexosef.fr to get more information about prevention, PrEP, TASP, vaccines, and condoms. But not everyone was happy about this campaign, and you could see that in some cities, there is still homophobia that you need to fight against, and stigma against MSM. So that's not so easy, even in France today. That's why it's also critical to get support from the politicians. And here you have the mayor of Paris, at the City Hall meeting, explaining what are the tools that are available in France to prevent HIV acquisition. It's written in French, but you could see 1 is condoms, 2 is repeat testing, 3 is PrEP, and 4 is TASP, the use of treatment for those already infected. As we know, undetectable means untransmissible. The City of Paris also launched last summer a campaign for prevention among MSM and heterosexual people. And again, this is a quite subtle campaign where you have these gentlemen saying that, we want to make Paris, again, the city of love without AIDS. And this guy says, well, thanks to PrEP, I can, remain free of HIV. But the message is still difficult to convey, and not everyone is aware yet in France about PrEP. If we look at the global PrEP rollout in 2018, you could see that only a few countries have implemented PrEP so far, and the total number of people on PrEP is in the range of 300,000. This is not enough. UNAIDS has called for nearly 3 million people by 2020 being on PrEP. And I think, we may need up to 30 million people on PrEP eventually. Let's look now at something which I feel interesting. It is the ratio of PrEP users versus the number of people with new HIV diagnoses every year. If you look at France, the ratio of PrEP users versus the number of new HIV diagnoses every year is just above 1. We have nearly 6,000 new infections, and we assume that today in France we have nearly 8,000 people on PrEP. In the US, they are doing better. The ratio is nearly 6 to 1. 40,000 new HIV infections, more than 200,000 people on PrEP. Australia is doing great. They have only 1,000 new infections every year, but they managed to put nearly 15,000 people on PrEP. So the ratio is 13 to 1. Maybe that's because they advertise PrEP much better than we do in France. And the results are there. Andrew Grulich and colleagues from New South Wales presented at CROI that within 2 years in New South Wales, they were able to see among MSM, not among the other high-risk groups, a 25% decline in new HIV diagnoses. So let's hope that the new campaign, which started just last week in France, and you can see photos taken in the Parisian metro, where you have these, I think, self-explaining campaigns showing a man and a woman, 2 men, and this is, again in French, 1 pill a day will protect you against HIV. Thanks to the NGO heads with which we are collaborating at ENRS, I hope this will also increase awareness about PrEP in the community. So what are the lessons we've learned in France about PrEP? Community empowerment and lobbying are key for PrEP approval and PrEP implementation. We still need to increase awareness among doctors, among people at risk, that there are new preventive tools that they can ask for. High-risk individuals should benefit from comprehensive sexual health care, including PrEP. So PrEP is not only providing pills, but it's providing comprehensive sexual health care. We know about STI testing, vaccines against hepatitis, counseling about risk reduction, etc. I think it's critical that we upscale PrEP implementation and that we do that quickly to be able to show the public health benefit of PrEP implementation on the HIV epidemic. And before I close, I'd like to thank my colleagues at the St. Louis Hospital here and all the funders who help us doing this work over the last 8 years. Thank you. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the next speaker, Ian Green from the UK. Ian is the Chief Executive of Terence Higgins Trust, the UK's largest HIV and sexual healthcare charity. He has held high-profile leadership roles in the voluntary health, local government, housing, and social care sectors. Ian.
Good morning. Good to see you all. I'm delighted to be here as CEO of the Terence Higgins Trust. THT was named after one of the first people who have known to have died of an AIDS-related illness in the UK, Terry Higgins. And today we're at the forefront of HIV prevention, enabling people to live well with HIV, and importantly, to amplify the voices of people living with or affected by the virus. Now, I've been asked to present on getting the national health system to cover PrEP. It's a story of contrasts. In Scotland and Wales, where through different mechanisms and following campaigns from a number of organisations, including THT Cymru and HIV Scotland, PrEP is now freely available to all those who need it from within the National Health Service. In England, however, the story is very different. A story of broken commitments, anger, activism, passion, blood, sweat, tears, and legal action to fight to get NH England to commission PrEP. And that fight is not yet over. It's a story of some amazing community heroes, a number of whom are in this room today, who I'm pleased and proud to call my friends and allies. So where does this story begin? Following the successful PROUD trial that showed the efficacy of PrEP in preventing HIV infections, the formal process of commissioning PrEP began. HIV organisations, activists, clinicians, and other interested individuals all came together to ensure that the pressure was placed on commissioners, and particularly on NHS England, to quickly and effectively ensure that PrEP was routinely available to those who needed it. In addition, a number of new grassroots organisations, campaigning organisations, were formed to assist in the campaign, but also, really importantly, to hold the sector's feet to the fire. In many respects, these new kids on the block were ahead of the game and certainly better prepared for what was to come than some of the more established HIV organisations, and I'd include Terence Higgins Trust in that list. PrEPster, formed by my good friends Mark Thompson and Will Nutland, they campaigned and organised around PrEP. I Want PrEP Now, established by Greg Owen and Alec Craddock, developed a website to enable people to purchase PrEP, their own PrEP, online. Now, because of PrEPster and I Want PrEP Now, there are many thousands of people today who are accessing PrEP that would not otherwise be able to do so and will continue to be at risk of HIV. Mark, Will, Greg and Alex are amongst some of the finest HIV activists that I've had the privilege to meet and work with. My first set of heroes. I'm delighted that PrEPster is now funded by the Elton John AIDS Foundation, and I Want PrEP Now is part of Terence Higgins Trust. A coalition of like-minded organisations, I Want PrEP, United for PrEP, was formed in 2016 to develop and combine our publicity campaign, engaging with the media, journalists and politicians. Planning meetings took place in THT's offices in London or at the National AIDS Trust, and a wide variety of different organisations came together, many of whom had historically been suspicious of each other, but they were working together, planning, scheming, plotting, all with one common goal in mind, to ensure that people at risk of HIV had free access to PrEP. All the time the campaign was taking place, the lengthy process that would hopefully result in the commission of PrEP continued. But then in the spring of 2016 came the shock announcement from NHS England that they were halting the commissioning process because they believed, because of change in law, that they no longer had the power to commission PrEP. This was a bolt out of the blue and resulted in a huge amount of anger and further galvanised the campaign. So here you see people campaigning outside of the Department of Health. And here is the United for PrEP coalition of all of the HIV organisations marching together in the 2016 London Pride March, the first time that very disparate organisations have marched together at a Pride event. So we kept up the pressure, and due to the ongoing campaign and the threat of legal action, we thought that had prompted a change of heart from NHS England. But this was short-lived, and once again, they reconfirmed that they did not have the power to commission PrEP. So here come my second set of heroes, the National AIDS Trust. NAT are a dedicated HIV policy organisation. They are relatively small, extremely professional, and extraordinarily brave. They took the difficult but correct decision to begin legal proceedings in the High Court in London, challenging NHS England's assertion that they did not have the legal power to commission PrEP. And here is my good friend Deborah Gold, the Chief Executive of the National AIDS Trust, speaking outside of the High Court on the incredible day when NAT won the legal case. In his determination, the judge, Mr. Justice Green, said this: "No one doubts that preventative medicines make powerful sense. But one government body says it has no power to provide the service, and local authorities say they have no money. The National AIDS Trust is caught between the two, and the potential victims of this disagreement are those who will contract HIV, but who would not contract the virus were the preventative policy be fully implemented. In my judgment, the answer to this conundrum is that NHS England has erred in its belief that it has no power to commission the preventative drugs in issue." As you can imagine, a huge sense of relief at this incredible victory, only to be dashed the next day when NHS England decided to appeal the decision. Not only did NHS England appeal the case, but they, in my view, compounded their foolishness by issuing an inflammatory and condemnatory press release pitting one patient group against another, leading directly to some of the most homophobic and negative press reporting that we've seen in the UK since the early days of the epidemic. I'm pleased to say that when the appeal was finally heard in November 2016, again, the National AIDS Trust won the case. So following this lengthy and costly legal process, NHS England decided to commission a wide-ranging PrEP implementation trial for up to 10,000 participants. A good step in the right direction, but still not the routine commissioning that we had been calling for. You know, this was genuinely a David versus Goliath battle between individual activists, HIV organisations, clinicians, versus the might of the National Health Service. And of course, David won. So much so that the BBC have recently told this story in a powerful documentary featuring Greg Goin and many of us who were involved in the campaign. And I believe it's still available on the BBC iPlayer for another 24 hours if you have access to it. So the PrEP Impact Trial has now been open for 9 months. And as of last week, 8,000 out of the 10,000 places are filled. Even with an additional 3,000 places that we're expecting to be announced shortly, all places on the 3-year trial will be filled by the end of this year. So the campaign continues. And here's just a recent bit of publicity that we decided that we needed to put out. So where are we now? We still do not have PrEP routinely commissioned on the NHS in England. The Impact trial will shortly be full. I'm afraid to say that we're seeing very little evidence of much activity to commission PrEP, even if this is going to happen before the end of the trial in October 2020. Already some men who have sex with men are being turned away from their nearest clinic without accessing PrEP. For many, the only way to access PrEP will be to purchase it online themselves, and many individuals just do not have the money to do that. Therefore, as part of the ongoing campaign, I'm pleased to announce today that Terence Higgins Trust will shortly be launching a PrEP Access Fund to enable individuals on low or no incomes who are not able to access the trial to buy PrEP for themselves online. This fund plans to enable up to 1,000 individuals between now and 2020 to access PrEP. The fact that a charity is having to step in to fund PrEP access to those in most financial need is an embarrassment and demonstrates the crucial need for NHS England to act now. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ian, for a very inspiring talk. Our next speaker is Othman Melouk from Morocco. Othman is currently the Intellectual Property and Access to Medicine Lead at ITPC and the Vice Chair of MPACT. He previously worked with the Association de Fight Against HIV/AIDS in Morocco, and he's an active advocate for the access for treatment in the MENA region, with a particular focus on the effect of intellectual property on access to HIV treatment. So, Othman.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So good morning. I'm very honored this morning to be here in this important session to discuss PrEP, but not necessarily the data or the efficacy, but more to speak about the politics of PrEP. And I think it's a very important question because it's not as easy or as obvious as it could be. And we have seen already in countries like UK or France that it has not been easy there. I have been asked to respond to this difficult question. how we strike a balance between treat all and PrEP where we are not treating all. I tell you from the beginning, I don't have the answer. I tried to think about it. At ITPC, we have been thinking about it since a couple of years now, and I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts, some of the work that we are doing under ITPC, and that I think may help to respond to this question. So you all have seen the data that have been presented during a few days ago. A remarkable progress have been achieved during the past decade in terms of access to treatment. We are more than 21 million people who are receiving ART, but still 40% of people living with HIV are not accessing treatment. This is the global average, but when we go and look at regional disparities and inequalities, we have 60% of people living with HIV in West Africa who do not have access to treatment. And in my region, the Middle East and North Africa, it's even worse because 4 people living with HIV among 5 do not have access to treatment. And when treatment is accessible, people do not have access necessarily to optimal drug regimens. So people are still using toxic drugs that have heavy side effects and that have implications on adherence, that have implications also on personal lives and health of people. ARV stockouts are very common. So it's not that people countries declare having treatment, so there is a lot of problems of procurement and a lot of problems of stockouts that are leading either to treatment interruptions or sometimes to switches, which also create problems of drug resistance, etc. And we still don't have, unfortunately, appropriate monitoring of the treatment, and access to routine viral load testing is still weak, and in very many places it's not even existent. And it's raised also the question of using treatment as prevention, how to make sure that undetectable is untransmissible when there is no way to know that we are undetectable or not. So last year, we had ITPC organized a PrEP think tank meeting in Trinidad, and we had representatives from various groups of communities, from men having sex with men, people living with HIV, people who inject drugs, sex workers, transgender, etc. And the general consensus was that all communities are convinced that PrEP is a useful strategy, and they wanted to work together to scale up access to PrEP. However, a certain number of concerns have been raised. So I try to summarize 4 of them here, but there have been many others. There is a fear that there will be a shift in HIV programming, and this will slow down advocacy efforts to promote other services like condom use, harm reduction services, legal services, etc., and protection for groups, or prevention of sexually transmitted diseases. And I'm sure that the following colleagues from sex work networks have raised some this kind of concerns. There is also risk with this biomedicalization of the response to minimize the systemic and structural barriers that manifest in stigma, criminalization of key populations. So we're not solving this, or people think that this is not going to stay a priority. And I can say that we don't see really on the ground that it is a priority today. There's also the main question I'm trying to respond to today, which is the ethical questions of giving PrEP or antiretrovirals to people who are HIV negative, when people who are HIV positive and who need these medicines to survive or are not getting treatment or getting bad quality treatment. And there is also questions that have been raised around the real life feasibility of sustained adherence to PrEP in light of the legal barriers, stigma, discrimination, criminalization that may maybe hinder efforts or the question of adherence. So how to strike a balance? I think, and from our experience in ITPC, that we need to stop considering prevention from one side and treatment from the other side, or HIV negative people and HIV positive people, and we need to think through the continuum of prevention, care, and treatment. Today we know that prevention is treatment and treatment is prevention. It's just ridiculous to have these prevention departments and treatment departments, etc. We need to think what is in green on the left is really the prevention continuum, where people are exposed to prevention, all kind of prevention, and stay in this loop as they are negative. And once people are diagnosed positive, they can go through the cascade of linkage to care, initiation, etc. So I think the first thing in our organizations, in our programs, etc., we need to start thinking with the continuum and not anymore with separated interventions. The second thing is that there is no one size fits all. I think each country, each population, sometimes even each subpopulation, need to have their own advocacy agenda. And the program should be tailored to the realities. And I think one good example that I can mention is the one of my country in Morocco. We started discussions on PrEP 4 years ago. It was quite early, but it was complicated. At that time, even people living with HIV were not accessing tenofovir-based regimens. And while people were asking for tenofovir, how can we provide, for example, tenofovir or Truvada to people living, people who were negative? So there has been some work to improve first, in parallel, the quality of treatment received by people living with HIV, to adapt locally. We are a Muslim country where homosexuality is criminalized, sex work criminalized, etc. And when we have these big agencies and come in and send in or put in programs in different countries, it doesn't work. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to empower communities. And ITPC, as a result of this PrEP think tank, we developed a toolkit for activists who want to work on advocacy for PrEP, and you can find it in our website. The third thing, I think it is important to improve and support community monitoring. The best investment we can do is in communities. They are the ones who are going to tell you or to tell the funders or the program the program initiators what works, what doesn't work. And in ITPC, we created or we developed a model of community monitoring. So you saw the cascade that I showed, or the continuum that I showed earlier, and we try to create these observatories and check at each stage who is left behind, what prevention services are available, what is the quality of the services, what are the problems vis-à-vis of linkage to care, what drugs are people taking, what is the quality. And by doing this monitoring, I think we can first, it feeds our advocacy efforts, and it enables to improve this continuum. And I think we cannot improve prevention if we do not improve the quality also of treatment that is provided for people living with HIV. This is our model, how it works, but I'm not going to insist on this. And the fourth point that is important is that I think more work is needed to make medicine more affordable. We have the cost. We have the cost of PrEP that is linked to patents. Luckily, we don't have a lot of patents on tenofovir and emtricitabine. Some regions, this problem is higher than in others, for example, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And the good news is that yesterday, the certificates for extension of patent protection in Europe have been rejected, which means that generics are going to enter the market very soon. However, PrEP of tomorrow maybe it's not going to be Truvada anymore, and we need to work on other drugs. So the problem of patents needs really to be addressed for PrEP drugs, but also for treatment for people who are already infected with HIV. Now we are talking about treatment optimization. There has been a lot of talk about dolutegravir during this conference. People living with HIV want access to dolutegravir because it is less toxic because of various reasons. It is going to be tricky to continue to provide suboptimal treatment regimens to people living with HIV when people who are negative are not accessing. People still look at this. We need to have people living with HIV supporting PrEP programs. So lastly, we should not forget that PrEP is not just a pill. So PrEP, it is a program, and we focus, unfortunately, too much on the pill, and we are not focusing on the rest. So I think we need to keep this in mind. There is no one-size-fits-all, so we need to adapt. We need to explain to the communities. We need to empower communities and invest on communities. Structural barriers are very critical, and it will be critical, especially in context of criminalizations of key populations. There is a need to optimize what treatment that is available today for people living with HIV, involve communities at all levels, including people living with HIV, and PrEP is not an issue only of HIV-negative people. And I think community monitoring is very important because we need to see how PrEP is going to be rolled out at country level. Communities should be able to monitor themselves and to improve the programs. If you want more information about all these campaigns, we have the toolkit that you can upload in our website. Watch What Matters is our community watchdog program that we started now in West Africa that we are trying to extend in other countries, and our campaign on IP and access to medicine, Make Medicines Affordable. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ottoman, for your perspective. So our next speaker is Amaka Enemo. Amaka is the National Coordinator of Nigeria Sex Worker Association and also the chairperson of National Key Affected Population Network of Nigeria. She advocates on a number of key issues, including for the inclusion of PrEP in Nigeria National Treatment Guidelines, and was an AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition Fellow in 2016. So Amaka, if you want to come to the podium.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak on the, are you really sure communities know what to talk about when you say you provide them with PrEP? I'm going to share from my experience during my fellowship with AIDS Vaccine Coalition in 2016. You know, in the community we don't like big English. We like practical something that when you come to me and tell me that pre-exposure prophylaxis is for people that are negative, you need to tell me what it is in my local language. So if you want to get the full involvement of the community in what you are doing, you need to use the language they understand. Because we know that PrEP is very important to us, especially sex workers that stand in the streets at night, 1 a.m., we know what happens there, but you don't know. So when you want to bring PrEP to us, you let us know what you're bringing. So why I want to speak about the fellowship I had is that I had the opportunity to advocate for PrEP to be included in the National Prevention and Treatment Guideline in Nigeria. and find it was there now, and it was launched in the 1st December 2016. How did it come to happen? We used the community. We gave the community the voice to speak, to understand exactly what PrEP is all about. We explained to the community that peer-to-peer, like we use peer-to-peer approach to get them. Because if we use the normal slides, data, long English, big English, at the end of the day, we'll come sit and go back. But because you use our community to talk to the community, we were able to achieve that. They created demand for PrEP in Nigeria, and PrEP is now in the guideline. But being in the guideline is one, making it work is two. Now it's in the guideline. The community are demanding for PrEP to be used. They are demanding that PrEP should be given to them because we face so many violence, especially in Nigeria. Sex workers face so much violence. They are mostly raped by their clients, the law enforcers. They know they need PrEP, but how will they access this PrEP is the problem. The government is interested in the people living with HIV, and we have new infection as much as 230,000 new infection every year. So I think if we invest more in the prevention, the money used in getting ARV will also reduce. We are also thinking about the sustainability of PrEP, knowing that PrEP is very expensive. How will the community be getting it? So when you're coming to talk to people, when you're coming to talk to us about PrEP, have all these things in mind. I'm not going to speak more, but I know that when you talk to the community about PrEP properly, when you explain to them, we need it because of the risk in what we do and the environment we are in. When you talk to us, explain to us what exactly PrEP is, we will understand. I am not talking about my country. I am talking about other people that want to introduce PrEP for communities in their country. Let the community be the lead. Let them talk to themselves about it. Let them carry the good news, because if a community member talks to a community member, there is every tendency that 10 people like on Israel, they will discuss and know about it. So I'm going to stop now, but I must appreciate AVEC and Heartland Alliance Nigeria for giving me this opportunity to bring PrEP to Nigeria. Thank you so very much.
So thank you very much, Amaka, for the work you're doing in Nigeria. So the next speaker is Alexandra Trocero. She is the Regional Specialist on Adolescents Health and HIV for UNICEF Latin America and the Caribbean Regional Office. She has over 20 years of experience working in HIV, gender, human rights, and sexual and reproductive health and rights. She worked for various international organizations and research projects, including the International Planned Parenthood Federation and the International AIDS Alliance. And she's going to talk about PrEP and adolescents.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to look at how we get PrEP to young people, and in particular older adolescents and young people. The focus of my presentation is going to be in the region I work, Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm going to look a little bit about what is the situation with epidemic in the region, and then in terms of availability, some of the challenges, some additional challenges when we trying to supply PrEP to young people, and how to create demand. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the epidemic among young people in Latin America, you're going to see that the reduction of new infections among young people, particularly on the 15 to 24, has only reduced about 7% compared with 80% plus in other parts of the world. So the global prevalence reduction. The epidemic is stagnant. and it's been stagnant for a decade or more now. When we look at new infections, 1/3 of new infections are taking place on young people, but in some countries that proportion is much higher. And so we need to also think about how we work with younger adolescents and older adolescents and look at the distinctions as well. In terms of female and male ratio, we know that the epidemic in the region is concentrated, is mainly among young gay men and men who have sex with men and transgender women. But there in parts of the region is also about young females, in particularly in parts of the Caribbean. So we do have two distinctive trends in the region. Which also question us whether when we think about PrEP for our region is only about gay men, or we need to think a little bit more broader than gay men. In terms of availability, at the moment, PrEP is available through the public sector in 3 countries, Bahamas, Barbados, and Brazil. And in terms of young people, there is no a policy. Brazil is they're conducting now a feasibility study. There are guidelines that they released last year. It's only for adults, so it's not for under 18, for older adolescents. And this is something that they hope within the next years to be able to have the evidence to include also in the public sector. There are also 11 countries with demonstration studies. Most of these studies are supported by the Global Fund, and they are small demonstration studies. And it could also be available through clinics and online, but that is not free. So when we think about young people, one of the biggest concerns in a way is about availability. In Latin America, and in particularly in the Caribbean, HIV testing is limited to over 18 years old. Some countries have made provisions for provision of HIV testing under 16, but when we talk about medical treatment, the age of consent is 18. So for any older adolescent who is sexually active, who want to access PrEP, they need to work with their parents or tutors. So this is one of the biggest, and it's going to be the biggest barrier to trying to get access to PrEP for older adolescents. I forgot to mention that when we look at late diagnosis, Latin America is suffering from a high proportion of late diagnosis, which means that the onset of the epidemic of the infection happened in early age. And we don't have real data to say exactly to what extent is a problem. So at the moment, it's only estimations that we have. I think when we compare a region with other regions, Latin America really lack detailed data among other young people. And it's something that I hope that with some of the analysis that we recently conducted, we'll be able to put that into the policy agenda for the region. Also mentioned that PrEP is not just a pill, it's about a program. And when we think about adolescents, we need to, and young people, we need to think about the barriers to access health services. And so for any adolescents or young person going to a clinic, a health clinic, is not the most, and we hear this week a lot about it. It's not an easy thing. And so adolescents and young people tend not to go to healthcare. And so how we make these programs more friendly to ensure that there is a continuation in care once they decided to start PrEP. Sorry, I'm going to also in terms of some of the challenges, looking at evidence and the little evidence that exists around young MSM, and I'm focusing more on young MSM because it's where the epidemic is in our region. Some of the studies are showing that evidence of the perception of risk varies, and having a perception of risk doesn't mean that they will initiate PrEP, and that some of the demonstrations studies are showing that risk and access or likelihood of starting PrEP are not related, are not correlated. So when we think about young people and what of the considerations that we need to think about, one is around access to treatment. Is also about adherence, but it's also about perceptions of risk, how they vary across lifetime, and what sort of strategies will be needed over time. There is also questions around negotiating risk. I mean, it's a time of exploration, and I want you to think a little bit when you were young and when we started dating and having relations, whether everything was new and we were creating that moment. So it was all about our invention, it was our explorations, and so how we bring that exploration as well to a more positive experience in terms of the programs that we are, the programs that will be designed for young people. UNICEF conducted a poll last year for 1st of December. It was a youth report. It's an online platform with young people that were asking questions, and young people responded around access to sexual and reproductive health services. The poll involved 270,000 young people across the world. 50% of them reported had been mistreated by health providers. And of those that reported being mistreated, sexual orientation and gender identity were and being HIV positive were the most frequent reasons for being mistreated in healthcare facilities. So it's also something about to take into consideration. I just wanted to mention two things in the guidelines of the modules that WHO released last week on PrEP for adolescents and young people, and FDA only approved PrEP for adolescents 2 months ago in May. So this is also an area that is starting to get more attention, and I think we're going to see more coming up soon outside Africa, which I think is where most PrEP for adolescents is happening right now. So how we make adolescents on demand and how we involve them into PrEP programs. When we see the experience in France or in UK, we know that it's very challenging. In Latin America, we can't talk about sex, and let alone talk about same sex. So we have a long way to go. We need to think about campaigns that are very much youth-led. I put one of the adaptations that colleagues at the civil society have done in Latin America is to adapt the I Want PrEP to the Latin American context. And as soon as you get into the page, you're going to see that the first things that come is the information in this page is for people older than 18. So one of the issues is that access to information is still limited. The other is in Guatemala, and I want to make first a recognition of the work that CAS in Guatemala is doing to provide PrEP through a small community clinic in Guatemala City. And one of the issues they're facing is that they can give PrEP even if an adolescent, somebody who is under 18, come to the clinic to request it. They cannot provide it unless they're coming with the parents. And this is going to be for us a long way still to go to challenge some of these existing norms and laws and regulations. So this is, for me, some of the questions that they still is about how we ensure that older adolescents and young people access PrEP, how we ensure that campaigns and information for them is youth-led, is them doing it, and how we challenge some of the legal and policy barriers that limited access to health services. Thank you. And I wanted to acknowledge the people.
So thank you very much, Alejandra. And indeed, adolescents are a key population we need to focus on. So our last speaker is Don Colby. Don Colby is a clinical research physician at the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Center in Bangkok, Thailand. And he has done a lot of work on acute HIV infection.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about our experience at the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Center in Bangkok in rolling out a PrEP project. And this is on behalf of all the individuals at the Thai Red Cross and the Anonymous Clinic who helped implement this project. So first, a little bit of background. So in the early 1990s, Thailand had a sort of catastrophic HIV epidemic, mostly concentrated in drug users and the heterosexual population. But Thailand really, through an effective response, was able to decrease the number of new infections by 90% by 2000, so a long time ago. But just like we saw, Jean-Michel showed us in France, even though the overall number of infections is going down, there's a change in the epidemiology, and what we see in recent years is the number of MSM and transgender women who get HIV is actually going up, even in the context of total numbers going down. So now we're at about 3,000 or 4,000 MSM who get HIV every year in Thailand. And that just shows the same thing. So right now in Bangkok, about 1/3 of MSM are HIV infected, and overall in the country, it's about 7% HIV prevalence among MSM. So I work at the Thai Red Cross AIDS Research Center. It's the largest HIV testing center in Thailand with over 35,000 tests per year. And our PrEP project there started in 2014. So what was the situation at that time? So in our testing clinic, the HIV prevalence of MSM who were coming in for voluntary testing was 20%, but in the non-MSM population, it was still high, was 6%. And MSM were only about 1/3 of clients coming into the center, but they were 90% of all acute HIV infections that we were detecting. So this was 2014, so we knew about PrEP. All the studies had been done, or the major studies had been done at that time. So we said, well, what do we need to do to start PrEP? I mean, we know that it works. We know we have a population at risk. How can we get it to the people who need it as quickly as possible? So we made a checklist. What would you need to do to start PrEP? I'm not going to go through this, other than to say that if you have an ART clinic, you can do PrEP. You have everything you need to do PrEP, except number 4. And number 4 is you sort of write a protocol and you train your staff and you do it. So that's what we did. And the time that it took for when we started thinking about this, how can we do it, until the first person got PrEP, it just took 1 month. That's all it took. So we wrote a protocol, we trained the staff, and we started doing it. So we started in December 2014, and this was the first PrEP available to the public in Thailand outside of a clinical trial. So it's fee-based. You know, I said it took a month, so you're not going to like write a proposal and a grant and get money in a month. So we did this, no money at all. So it's fee-based. People had to pay for the service, and basically the fees have to cover 100% of the service. Now, we are lucky because we have access to low-cost generic medications in Thailand. So we were able to provide the service for 30 baht, 30 Thai baht, and that's about $1. And that actually covers everything. So it covers the cost of the medicine, it covers the cost of all the testing, covers the cost of seeing the counselors in the clinic. So we had an existing VCT clinic. We also did ART. So we basically used our existing staff and facilities. We came up with a simple protocol for what I call at-risk clients. I don't like to talk about high risk because lots of people get HIV who don't fall into our traditional categories of high risk. So people who are at risk, are screened by the VCT counselors when they come in, and then offered PrEP if they appropriate. And then we're able to offer PrEP at the first visit after doing a rapid HIV antibody test. So this shows the number of clients per month since we started. At the beginning, it was very low, only about 5 or 10 clients per month. But over time, this has gone up steadily, and now we're having about 70 to 90 new PrEP clients per month. And this just shows the cumulative users of PrEP at the clinic over time. And probably by the time I get back to Bangkok early next week, we'll be over 2,000 people. Now, I said that this was the first program to make PrEP available in Thailand for the public, but of course it's not the last. And 4 years later, we have a large number of programs in Thailand. Some offer PrEP free, others offer it with a fee, and it's also becoming more decentralized. So it's not only in Bangkok, but in other areas of Thailand as well. And I can say, too, that the Thai Ministry of Public Health has committed to making PrEP available in the public sector through the National Insurance Program. Sometime, it could be as early as later this year or maybe early next year, but they've sort of agreed in principle, and that's in the works. Now, when we started this project, this was really, there was no PrEP available, so we said, well, let's make it available for a fee until there's other programs that can come on and maybe offer it at low cost or possibly for free. And I really thought that once PrEP was available for free in multiple locations, who's going to come and buy PrEP when you can get it free somewhere else? But I was wrong, actually, because even though all these programs are starting that are offering PrEP free, mainly for MSM and transgender women, people still come and get PrEP. So this shows that how many people are on PrEP through all the projects in Thailand now. The biggest one now is called the Princess PrEP, so that's made available through a donation from one of the princesses in the royal family of Thailand. But you can see there's a number of other programs as well. And despite the fact that you can go many places in Bangkok now and get PrEP for free, the number of people who still come and pay for it still is increasing pretty much every month. So the lessons learned, one, PrEP can be started very, very quickly using existing facilities and staff, and like I say, any places doing ART can do PrEP. MSM and other high-risk individuals are willing to pay for PrEP if it's delivered at an affordable price. So in Thailand, we're lucky. We have low-cost generic PrEP available. Right now, the cost is about $20 US per month. And just last week, I heard the price is actually going to come down. It's going to be probably less than $15 per month within the next few months. And that even as programs come up that offer PrEP for free or even lower cost, I think that providing fee-based PrEP through clinics in the private sector is still going to remain an important resource for getting PrEP to everybody who needs it and wants it. So with that, I'll finish and just say thank you to the people and organizations who provided the information that I showed in this talk, the Prevention Department at the Thai Red Cross, and then USAID linkages. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Don. So we can start now our discussion. So I will encourage you to come to the microphone, ask questions, identify yourself, and identify also the person in the panel to whom your questions are directed. So maybe microphone one, Ken.
Hi, Ken Mayer from Boston. Great panel, really impressive diversity of programs. Somebody who's been involved with PrEP work for a while, two things I didn't hear as much discussion I'd love to hear from the panel. One is the issue of PrEP persistence, how well we're tracking persistence, because PrEP is not necessarily something somebody has to be on for life. So going off PrEP can be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, but understanding the longitudinal trajectory of people's experience on PrEP would be very helpful, I think, for people to hear. And more discussion about comprehensive sexual health. PrEP is part of that, and Part of that is what services are provided, so part of the PrEP package. And in some parts of the world, I think access to the STI diagnostics, so we're actually screening people for STIs when they're coming in for PrEP care, I think is important to discuss too.
Thank you, Ken. Who wants to address this first question about PrEP persistence?
Oh, sure. I'll take a stab. So I think it's a very good question, and I think Ken is right that unlike ART, because like I say, a lot of the people doing PrEP may have done ART, and you get it drilled into your head, into the head of the patients. You have to take this medicine every day, or all these bad things are going to happen. And with PrEP, that's not true. So really, I think we had to do a lot of training of our counselors and the people giving PrEP to say that, if they don't take it every day, and as you proved in France, it's still effective, and you don't have to yell at them when they don't take their PrEP. And it may be appropriate for some people to stop and to start. So, but we've only looked preliminary at the data, and we have about 50-60% retention at 6 months, which I think is similar to other programs.
Thank you. And I think the point on sexual health is also key, and we see more and more people actually coming to the clinic to receive PrEP who are actually more interested by the global sexual health care that we can provide, and especially the STI testing. And we have a few people who actually are willing to discontinue PrEP because they feel they are not at risk anymore, or they are in a stable relationship, but they are still interested to come to the clinic every 3 months to receive the global sexual health care and to be tested for STIs, to receive peer counseling. So that's what's nice about PrEP. It's not only giving a pill, it's providing a comprehensive environment where people feel comfortable and can speak about sex, can speak about their risk and how to reduce their risk and of HIV and STIs in general. So let's take another question, microphone 2.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Sara Paparini from the Graduate Institute in Geneva. I have a question for Ian. Could you comment on since what we've heard from the other speakers about the very different costs of PrEP in different contexts, could you comment on whether you thought that the cost of Truvada might have had something to do with the NHS's decision, and had it been available as generic drug, do you think that things would have gone differently after the trial?
I'm sure cost had a lot to do with the decision that was taken. I'm not convinced by the argument that the NHS put forward to say they weren't empowered to commission PrEP. I think, as often is the case, it comes down to, in our situation, pound signs rather than necessarily the ability or the power to deliver something through a commission process. The IMPACT trial is using generic drugs, and so that's now something that is without any challenge. And in Scotland, the Scottish Government are routinely commissioning PrEP, utilising generics. So other parts of the NHS system in the UK have got round it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So microphone 5.
Hi, I'm Bridget Hare. I'm a bioethicist from the Kirby Institute in Australia. And my comment and question is to Othman about the issue that you raised about a potential ethical conflict between supplying PrEP in a context where you don't have good provision of tenofovir-based regimens. And the point that I wanted to make about that is that drug access isn't a simple supply issue, it's a complex political issue. And so treating it as a kind of finite resource that will be depleted by supplying it to one group is actually a false assumption. And in fact, given the kind of complex way that these things work, actually allowing access to PrEP can make access to other drugs easier in some respects. And was that the conclusion that you came to in the work that you were doing on this?
Well, first of all, maybe one comment that I didn't mention is that PrEP can also be the entry point to treatment for a lot of people, and we saw it in Morocco, and I saw it in my personal friends. Those who are at risk and who don't get tested and who went to get tested to get PrEP, and they discovered that they were HIV positive and they were put on treatment. So when we say that people don't have access to treatment, mainly it is also because people don't know their HIV status. In So we cannot wait until everybody gets treatment, especially if people don't know their status to start PrEP. I think it's a kind of balance that we need to do. Tenofovir regimens are existing now almost everywhere. So it's not the issue. I think the issue is going to be dolutegravir. So now it's became now the kind of standard of optimal treatment. The work what we do, we have challenged patents, for example, in Argentina have been withdrawn because we filed opposition in Argentina and we won some cases. Our colleagues in India and Brazil challenged the patent years ago. But now we need PrEP, as I said, of tomorrow is not Truvada. It's going to be maybe long-acting antivirals, cabotegravir. So we are actually trying to work and analyze the patents. We found I think there are some weaknesses and there is some work that can be done to ensure access to cabotegravir in generic version earlier. But it is a complex issue, as you say. So we cannot wait until everybody gets access to treatment because it's just ridiculous. And as I said, I think PrEP is going to help to find those who don't go to get tested because, and we saw it, and I personally around me with people who are really empowered and they know a lot about HIV, etc. And it was a kind of surprising to know that advocates around us were in this situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to take a question here, microphone 1.
Thank you very much. My name is Dilon. I'm an Advocacy fellow from Zimbabwe. Yesterday we had a presentation that I was speaking to on-demand PrEP, and I showed that in France it was really effective. So my question is going to Ian Green to say, what's your thinking around the cost-effectiveness of on-demand PrEP versus daily oral PrEP, and if it is cost-effective to take PrEP on demand, why are we not having a discussion that is linked towards PrEP on demand as opposed to daily oral PrEP, which has proved to have low retention?
I agree with you that that conversation needs to take place, and I think that what we are looking at with our PrEP Access Fund is daily PrEP at this point, but it is something that we will need to keep under review over the course of the programme. I forgot to mention that we are going to do a pilot of 250 places to begin with, just to see what the take-up is likely to be, which particular groups are showing interest, whether our criteria around affordability for the individual is appropriate, and there may be some clinical decisions that we want to take as well. But just to make it clear, legally, we are not allowed to prescribe or to enable someone to directly have access to PrEP. What we are legally allowed to do is give people the financial resource for themselves to go and order PrEP. So that's the distinction I need to make. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble.
Thank you. Maybe a clarification is needed also. I mean, the data from France on on-demand PrEP are data only generated among MSM. So today, on-demand PrEP can be an alternative to daily among MSM only. We don't have any data in transgenders or in heterosexual men and women at this point. Also, I think we should not oppose daily and on-demand PrEP. These are complementary approaches to PrEP, and they, as I showed yesterday, people can, switch from daily to on-demand and vice versa. So it's really, two approaches that are, again, complementary and could help people feel comfortable to use PrEP. And the idea is to provide more options for people to have access to PrEP, and so that these people who might be reluctant to take a daily regimen could know that they could use on-demand PrEP if they are MSM. Okay, so microphone 2. Gus.
Hello. Yeah, Gus Cairns from AIDSmap. This is a much more sort of peaceful and harmonious session than I was expecting. What I particularly liked was Ottman's mosaic of HIV services, because one of the things I heard yesterday from Vincent from Kenya, I don't know if he's in the room, was that PrEP is not a medicine, it's a behaviour, or to keep the P's in, it's not a pill, it's not really even a program, it's more a prevention behaviour, it's a lifestyle choice. And it's also, if you include the psychological and anti-stigmatizing aspects of PrEP, it can be peace of mind, as some of the qualitative studies done with MSM have shown. It can take away a lot of the anxiety about sex. So what that means is the more I think we work with it as it were, the new HIV prevention method, but taking some of our cues from the way we worked with condoms in the past, perhaps that's the best way of working with it. The less we put our medicalized hats on and expect people to take it every day, and it's got to be surrounded by this great structure of monitoring, perhaps the more easy it will be for affected communities to take it. I think if I was Peter Piot, which thank God I'm not, the two really crucial bits of making sure that the HIV treatment and reduction mosaic works is the bits right at the beginning, where you spread the knowledge of PrEP and prevention to the HIV negative population, say this is for you as well, and right at the end where you make sure there's cheap mobile viral load monitoring everywhere. That's my 2p worth anyway.
Thank you. Any comment from the panel?
I guess the only thing I just want to say, and Gus would not be surprised by this, is I really dislike the terminology a lifestyle choice.
Somebody else said it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I think that from our perspective, that people using PrEP are taking responsibility for their sexual health, and that should be commended.
And I would like to comment on the issue around testing, and particularly for young people. My sense is that self-testing, for example, is one of the strategies that we're looking for, but we are far away from it. And when I'm looking, for example, at exciting ways of delivering PrEP for young people, the issue around having a good, for example, post system in a country that will allow, the delivery of pills to wherever you live without having to face a stigma, face rejection. So new alternatives for delivering services. I think we are quite far away, particularly in my region, to think about how we make more feasible the access to services for young people.
Yeah, I've seen a great study in South Africa about self-testing in young MSM. It was really popular there.
Yeah.
And I guess to echo what Ian just said, I think it is, for people using PrEP, it shows that they're responsible. They take seriously their own health. What we should do once we have PrEP available today is to make sure that we have no longer people not using either condoms, no PrEP. We should make sure that people at risk understand that to be protected against HIV, they could use either a condom or PrEP or both. And in the PrEP program that we have in France, we were interested to see that among those who are using PrEP, 20% are using condoms in addition. And that's interesting trend. And, if you can use double protection, it's better, especially if you want to get rid of STIs at the same time. So microphone one.
Good morning. Juan Guanira from Peru. To the last speaker, Don Conley, any thoughts about why fee-for-service PrEP is still growing in Thailand, despite the fact that there's available fee services there? It's about the quality of service that this is still growing?
So maybe I can give 3 reasons that I can think of offhand. So one is the cost, because the cost is so low. Like I say, it's about $30 per month, and that's actually coming down. So it's not really much of a barrier, even in a middle-income country. For most people, or a lot of people, that's quite affordable. I think too that when you have a free program for PrEP, usually it's free is free in terms of money, but it's not free in terms of your time, right? You got to go in, you got to fill a lot of forms, you got questionnaires. You probably don't get it the first time. You might have to, there's some criteria to get in, whatever that is. And then the last thing I can think of too, I didn't show it there just because I couldn't show all the data, is that a lot of programs, and particularly the programs in Thailand, they focus on high risk populations, and oftentimes that's MSM and transgenders, and that's very appropriate, I think, for a program that's using donor funds or government funds for targeting services. But what we've seen is actually the number of heterosexuals who are coming in is actually going up. The percent is going up, and it's now up to 20%. It's still a minority, but obviously those heterosexuals are excluded from the, most of the high-risk populations. So for them, it may be, not an option to use the free programs at this time. In terms of friendliness, I would say our service is very friendly, but I don't think any more so than the others. Most of the other programs in Thailand are done through key population-led services or community-based services, and so I think in terms of the friendliness, they're all probably about the same.
Thank you. So, microphone 5.
Thank you. My name is Mark Thompson. I am one of the co-founders of PrEPster. I'm also the strategic lead for health improvement at the Terence Higgins Trust. So I stand here today very, very proud that we have announced our Access Fund, which is going to get PrEP to lots of people who need it. This is also just a bit of a plug as well as a comment. Fantastic panel, and it's really great to see so many people up there. But what we've realized as well is that some of the greatest voices and the enablers around PrEP use are PrEP users themselves, and hearing their voices is incredibly important, and it cascades, and we know that if people are worried about PrEP, speaking to other PrEP users is really, really an important tool. So I would just like to do a quick plug and invite you to come along to Club Church tonight, where you'll hear lots of PrEP users from around the world talking about their experiences, watching the PrEP 17 film and sharing their knowledge and experiences. So come down, it's going to be hot, it's going to be sexy, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So we hope to see you at 7 at Club Church.
Thank you. So, Rebecca, another question at microphone 5.
Oh, thank you. I've got a quick clinical question for Jean-Michel. One of the things that I've heard a lot of at this conference is from both cis and trans women taking daily PrEP, wondering about if they've had an adherence problem and trying to extrapolate from the data on demand what they should do and how long it would be before they can assume that they're covered, protected by PrEP again. Can you clarify that?
Thank you. That's a tough question. I'm not sure I can, provide too much insight because we don't have such an experience with on-demand regimen in these population. I think, as long as it is rectal exposure to HIV, I think on-demand should work well enough. We don't have any data yet for vaginal exposure, and I think this is a gap, and we hope that in the future we could assess whether, through vaginal challenge, on-demand PrEP could be also as effective as daily PrEP. But we don't have the data yet, and this is an area where we should continue to do research.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, it's your turn.
Hi, I just wanted the panel's thoughts on timelines regarding PrEP, particularly as obviously the patent in Europe and the changes that have happened there. What sort of estimations should we be looking for? When is reasonable and not reasonable for seeing where PrEP is available? Obviously it regards the wider world as well, but particularly relevant at the moment with Europe.
Well, you wouldn't be surprised, Jason, for me to say it should be now. I think there's no reason why PrEP should not be available, readily available now, in certainly parts of the global north, and therefore that's why the campaigning is so very vital. And we know PrEP works, and I think it's scandalous that something that is that works and is known to be completely effective is not being provided to those who need it. So that for me is the sort of the baseline. Then there are then the practical considerations about making sure that somebody is able to make sure it's properly funded, etc. But my baseline, it should be available now.
Thank you. Microphone 1.
Can I add just something?
Please.
I think with the decision now on the patents, it is feasible to do it right now. The problem is that I think some work needs to be done with generic producers. We know that some countries like France took risks, even if Gilead was challenging the generics, etc., and they lost 2 times. But now, with the decision that yesterday of the rejection of these supplemental clauses, at least in Europe, if the problem is the cost only, it can be, if generics file for registration, and I think there are European registration already done, I think it can come within 1 or 2 months, if really governments and people want to do it. But at least the feasibility in terms of patent and in terms of price, it's feasible.
Thank you. So microphone 1.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Heath Painter from the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations, and I just want to continue that conversation, Ottoman. In Australia, we recently achieved universal access to PrEP through our socialised health system, and we did that by encouraging multiple generic companies to enter into the market to actually increase massive levels of supply, which, as we know, pushes the price down. And so I actually think using Australia, and I know the systems are very different, but using Australia as a model, that very quick access can happen because through working with the generic companies to create a competitive pricing environment which will make PrEP cost effective for governments, and that was the model we took, and it happened quite quickly after the patent on the drug ended.
I think the Australian example is a really important one, but a similar example in Scotland, where they took within 6 months of the decision being taken, PrEP was being routinely commissioned in Scotland, and they were using generics, and there was no legal challenge.
Thank you. Maybe I have a question for Amaka, because I was interested by what you said about we should use the language people understand when we talk about prevention, PrEP, etc. Could you tell us a bit more? How do you talk about PrEP and condoms with your sex workers in Nigeria? And what do they tell you?
Okay, sex workers in Nigeria have a particular language they use. So if you are in their midst and they don't want you to understand what they are saying, there is a particular language they use or the sign they make. So if you want to talk to them and they don't want to listen to you, they can give themselves sign, and when you finish talking, you go and nobody will understand and key into what you're saying. So why I say that the community should be used to get the community is because they understand the language and how to use it. And in Nigeria, PrEP is approved to be used, but there is no pushing power, or there is no strong pushing for it to be implemented or to start being implemented, but it's already in the approved guideline. All right?
Thank you. So any other comments from the panel about this session, or any question from the audience? No more? Okay, so I think we will close the session, and thank you again for your participation, and thanks to the panel.